Good morning. It is Thursday, August 19th. Welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Today we are discussing monoclonal antibodies and updates on research to create new therapies for COVID-19. So glad to have Dr. Mario Castro joining us. He is Vice Chair and Clinical Translational Research. He's also a pulmonology specialist, so a lot of great insight from him today. And of course, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Steve Stites, joining us today. But first, we're going to get a quick look at the numbers. Dr. Hawkinson, good morning to you. How are we looking?
Hi. Yeah, today here at the health system, we have 90 total patients. Of those, 57 are in that active phase, with 21 of those 57 active patients in the ICU and 14 of those patients needing ventilators. We still have 33 additional in that recovery period as well. Hayes has 13 active patients and 1 in that recovery mode. Also, we are going to be giving some Children's Mercy numbers, and these are posted on their website as well, but they have 14 positive inpatient children right now. And overall, since March 2020, they've had over 6,500 total positive cases that they have diagnosed through their hospital and clinics.
Thank you for those numbers. We're going to get to our reporter questions in just a moment and community questions here in just a few minutes. But Dr. Stites, just some opening remarks, thoughts on those numbers?
Yeah, you know they're a concern, right? And here are a couple of concerns. First, we know that about 20% of our patients are vaccinated. Those are mostly people who tend to be older. Our average age of vaccination and hospitalization is 67. Our average age of those who are unvaccinated is 53. That's a really big difference, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a story there. I think the story is that we all have to be careful. Here's what we know. The rules of infection prevention and control travel with you, and they keep you safe wherever you go. And the rules have not changed. Wear your mask, keep your distance, cough at your elbow, don't go out after you're sick. You can still stay safe, even in the height of this Delta pandemic. We have also seen some case numbers in the metropolitan area that suggest there's been a bit of a flattening of the curve, which we are really happy about. But the problem is that schools are opening, so we think that's going to be another impetus. And we'll just now be seeing the things from large public gatherings like the Garth Brooks concert. So, and the Royals game last week had 35,000 people in it. So, you know, I think that we just have to be very, we've always said this is about constant vigilance and trying to make sure we take care of our families and our friends and work and stay toward our bubbles. And I think that's the same message we would deliver today. We know that that message would work. But I think we're a little nervous. I'm a little nervous about seeing the unvaccinated folks come in the hospital. But I think it's got a very common thread. It's people who have severe chronic illness who tend to be the ones who are vaccinated and coming in the hospital. Actually, not 10. That is clearly what's going on amongst the people. And it's an older patient population than the unvaccinated, distinctly older and significantly older. And I think what that is telling us as well is what we're hearing nationally is that there is some concern about how many shots you need to get full immunity and whether you need to have the booster. So I think that's why I think we're seeing that move toward boosters in certain disease populations, and a really a pretty clear discussion and pretty clear leadership from the government and from the FDA or from the NIH saying that it looks like everybody's going to need a booster.
Question, because this was in the news yesterday, just how football stadiums are now requiring vaccination cards in the fall to get in. Garth just canceled the rest of his concerts. What kind of effect do you think that's going to have? Just canceling those big events, requiring the vaccination cards. Do you think we're going to start seeing?
Yeah, I'm all about that. I think it'll be two things. I think first of all, it's going to more people will say they want to get vaccinated, and we are seeing it break. We are seeing some of the vaccine hesitancy begin to break, and vaccine rates pick up, even like in the Southeast and other places, which that's a good sign. And what I would just say to folks, please know that we have tried on this program to be honest and open and forthright from the very beginning. We just have nothing to hide here. Our staff, you heard it yesterday, Casey Pickering, I mean, what a star. She did a great job talking about how fatigued people are, and her letter to herself, the things I wish I'd known. If you didn't see that yesterday, you got to go watch it, because if anybody thinks we have any reason to not tell the truth, just listen to that letter and you'll put it aside. You will put aside all the silliness and the drama that's out there around vaccinations and whether this is a hoax and just the baloney about that. And so at the end of the day, here's what we know. Our employees don't get sick, and that's because they have masks. masks on. The idea that masking doesn't work, it's just so bogus. And then the second thing we have to recognize is that vaccination works. But there is a concern about it if you're really chronically critically ill. And if that's the case, you still need to keep your mask on, and you may need another shot. And if we can do those things, we can all stay safe. And we can keep it's not just about COVID, because your hospitals are completely full in Kansas City. We looked at the transfer center numbers and transfer center requests. We're going to set a record this month. We're going to hit about 3,000. That is 100 transfer requests a day. Think about that. There's 100 patients a day that need us, and we're taking less than a third because we don't have any beds. And without beds, we can't help people. And if there's the story in Louisiana, and it's not just in Louisiana. The patient who had a heart attack had to go to 6 hospitals. Well, that's a real delay of care. The key to care on time-sensitive diagnosis is, time. And so when you can't get to it in a timely fashion, people don't do well. So, when we do a better job of taking care of ourselves and not believing the International Society of Internet Science, and instead believing medical science and the things that those of us who have been honest and telling you the truth right from the start, if you would just listen and believe that, then we'll end up taking care of our community. And then when you get sick and you need help, you're not delayed. You can find the help you need. We're so used to having that in this country that we're kind of spoiled. Mm-hmm. But this should present us a real stark wake-up call. We're overwhelmed. Our teams are tired. I'm tired. Hawk's tired. Castro's tired. You're tired. We're freaking, folks, we're exhausted here. Give us a break. Quit believing the baloney and believe the science, because we have no motivation to tell you otherwise, right? We have no motivation to tell you otherwise. We just want you to take care of yourselves.
Thank you for that.
That's my rant. I'm done now.
I know. I have to let you get it out every day. We've got some reporters on the line who also have some questions. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Cody Holyoke with KMBC. A couple of questions for you about schools. This came out yesterday. Turner School District in KCK, they started last week, strongly recommended masks, but noticed not enough people were masking. Obviously, the kids in elementary school are unvaccinated. They changed their rule and said, we are going to start requiring masks today. So what are you hearing about other school districts? Kind of peel back the curtain for us a little bit. Do you think other districts will follow suit? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they will. And I applaud the Turner School District. And trust me, there are a lot of organizations out there spending a whole lot of time and effort trying to get people to mask on a regular basis. I know the folks at Children's do a ton of work on this. We've tried to do a lot of work on this. We work with the legislature. We work with everybody on this very question. And here's the deal. If you choose not to mask, then the very thing you want your kids to do, to come and be in person, Hawk, you said this the other day, you're gonna blow it up, because then you have to shut down, and it's just not necessary. It's not that hard to wear a mask, folks. It's just not that hard.
Yeah, I don't see how our school districts around our geographic area and footprint would be any different from the school districts that we've seen that have now had to go quarantine for 2 weeks because masks weren't used. Yes, it is true. The majority of spread is going to be outside of that school in those other public settings or social settings. But we still need to continue to do what we can in those situations, especially those high-risk situations when we are indoors. We know that's when masking has the most efficaciousness. We know that if we can increase the ventilation, open those windows in those schools when we can, that is going to be the way to keep those children in the school, keep them being able to socialize and not home quarantined or isolated.
And I think the key is when schools reopened last year, they kept people safe. And how did they do that?
We know how to do it.
They de-densified and they masked. Now they want to densify again. I mean, they want all the kids back. So, unless you've not been listening, the Delta variant's a whole lot worse, a whole lot more spreadable, and one person can make 5 or 8 people sick, not 2 or 3. And so, the answer to that is, if you want to keep kids safe and keep kids in school, then you better have masks on. And just to point out, you saw the stats. Children's Mercy has a lot of COVID kids now. This is different. Delta variant is different.
A quick follow-up. With the schools seeing spread, even in our area, and I'm sure across the country, early on, especially when these kids are unmasked, Does this change the timeline on a national level for getting an EUA, an emergency approval for shots for kids ages 2 to 11, or are there still? I know they're not going to fast track it, but I mean, is the pressure on here? What's going on?
Well, the pressure's on. I don't think there's any question. We should pull Mario into that question. I think the pressure's on, but I think that the FDA, people say the FDA is rushing, and we've said this before, the FDA is not rushing. That is not a fair statement. What they are doing is they've dedicated more people to look at the same information they would have looked at whether there's a pandemic or not. And actually what happens is other drugs are getting delayed because they've pulled more people to look at the same body of information that would really require a year or more to look at. They're trying to do it in 3 or 4 months, which does make it harder for other drugs to get approved. So there is no rush, but there is a lot of pressure. I don't think there's any question about that, Mario.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the vaccine studies that we've been conducting in pediatric populations have been started as of early as January and February of this year. And we are doing the same process with those kids in terms of conducting a randomized controlled trial with the placebo to really understand whether or not it's going to work in children. I've always been told as an adult pulmonologist, kids are not little adults. They have different immune systems. They have different exposures. And so you have to study it in a carefully done trial. I am very optimistic, though, we will have vaccine available for our kids. We have it currently approved now down to age 12. The first group of kids will likely be that 6 to 11 population, which will be approved, and then we'll get down to all the way down to infants. Those studies are ongoing right now in the midst of the pandemic. So we're hopeful that will give us an insight into what exactly to do for our kids. In the meantime, as Dr. Stites mentioned, wearing masks, it works in kids.
And just to say, Hawkeye, I think the other key about this treatment thing is if we remember when the FDA was looking at the data, they told the Pfizer Moderna to go back and get more information because they wanted to look carefully at myocarditis. Now, last week in the MMWR, they published and said myocarditis in kids isn't that bad. It's very short. It's going to be very safe, which I think is the FDA and the CDC put stuff out so the public can start digesting it. I actually think that was really good and well timed. I think what that is, they're saying, okay, guys, we've studied the myocarditis issue. It's going to be okay. It's far better than the myocarditis with COVID. And so, these are going to be safe. I think that's a prequel for what's about to come.
Yeah, and I think that's the best point there. They coupled those cases of myocarditis and the risk and the rate of getting the vaccine and myocarditis with the rate and risk of getting myocarditis with the actual infection. And that risk was much higher with infection with COVID-19 itself.
Yeah, and I think it's really encouraging that they put that out there and said, this looks pretty darn safe. So,
Other questions?
And just to piggybacking off of that, is there a timeline yet on when that first EUA might come down the pike?
Oh, I want it to be tomorrow, but I don't know that that's accurate. I'm going to guess it's not going to be till the middle of September. I think I think September-ish. I think they've said late September, early October. That's probably when it'll come. And I think, to your point, Cody, and you ask great questions, but I think that there's a lot of pressure with the FDA to go ahead and get it an EUA, but I think they're going to be really careful about it. And remember, the reason is because we know how to keep people safe in the interim. Wear a mask.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Cindy from KCTV5. I was wondering about the boosters. I had a couple of questions about the booster. First of all, is this third shot, I don't know if you call it a booster or whatever, is this third shot the same formula or is it changed at all?
I think to date it is the same formula. Now, Hawk and or Mario, guys may know this. They've talked about pivoting the mRNA vaccine a little bit to have a little more effectiveness against the Delta variant. But I've not heard that being in the boosters that are being, and I know that's not in the boosters currently being administered, and that may change, but I don't think it, what I'd heard it was November, December. Is that anybody?
Yeah.
I can speak about the boosters. The first boosters that will become available will be the Pfizer and Moderna booster vaccines. Those are using the same doses that we have currently approved under the EUA. There's ongoing studies with the vaccine being modified for the variants, specific to the variants. But you can imagine how difficult this is in terms of doing studies as variants come out. So, not too long ago we were talking about the B117, the UK variant, and so the initial studies were done with a vaccine modified for that. But then Delta came, and so as we go, creating a new vaccine per variant is likely not the best strategy. It's too quickly evolving. So at this point, what's going to be approved is both the Pfizer and Moderna. We hope in terms of the FDA action for that booster vaccine, and we know that not too far down the road will be the Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah, I think the only one that I was aware of was Moderna, and I think they were looking at the South African variant, pivoting their spike protein to that South African variant spike protein. But I think what we have to remember here is that we still have very good efficacy with these current vaccines, which were from that ancestral or that original Wuhan type of strain or variant before we saw all of these mutations and changes. But we still have very good efficacy with these vaccines. So why is that? Again, it is those conserved areas, those areas that don't change on the spike, that still provide very good antigens and areas for our immune system to identify and recognize and cause an immune response to, most notably for those T cells. So I think if they can come up for something to create an even better T cell response, that would be good. But right now, I don't believe there's really any other moving forward with changing or pivoting those spike proteins in response to other variants. Just as Dr. Castro said, that would be difficult because I think we are going to continue to see evolution of these and new variants pop up on a regular basis. But the good news is right now we still have those areas on the spike that don't change, that still cause very good immune response, especially for those T cells. If you do pivot that spike protein, really what you're going to do is just create specific antibodies that may be a little bit better for that particular spike. But again, as we have continued to have evolution and changes in that spike protein, those antibodies become less efficacious.
And I think it's important to point out that the vaccines continue to work in the vast majority of people, and even though there may be some waning of the antibody level, we still see good protection. And remember that even some of the data from Pfizer suggesting that in some populations the vaccine goes from 95% to 55% effectiveness, just to say that's the influenza vaccine now. Right, it's still got some effectiveness, and I think that you shouldn't just say, "Well, I'm never going to get vaccinated because they don't work." That's just completely wrong. You've completely misread the information if that's your conclusion. Actually, the vaccines work amazingly with incredibly few side effects and very few risks. Vaccination is one of the least risky treatments we have in any of our armamentarium in medicine, and that includes Tylenol and aspirin.
And I think it's also important to understand exactly what are we talking about in efficacy, because we do throw that word out a lot. Is it just infection? These vaccines weren't made to protect against infection. These vaccines were made to protect against that whole spectrum of disease, most notably hospitalization, severe disease, and death. And these still do a very good job of that. Recent publication in Clinical Infectious Disease, again, most of these isolates were alpha, but it still showed if you were not immune compromised, you had a 90% efficacy in protecting against hospitalization, severe disease, and death.
Yeah, and I think the Israeli data has demonstrated that a third shot does great things as well. So we're seeing a lot of evidence pouring in around the world about the importance of it. So when you do have an opportunity to get a booster, my advice is go get that booster. I think we'd all say that. Wait your turn. That everybody's going to have the right opportunity, and there's going to be a certain cadence to it. And I think it is important to do. But I think in the meantime, you should feel good about because even our patients who are vaccinated and hospitalized, they're not dying. The only ones we've had a few deaths in the vaccinated population, but there are people who you could probably think of giving them 27 shots. It wouldn't have made a real difference because they had so many chronic, critically ill issues, and it could have been anything that caused that for them. So I think for the overwhelming majority of our deaths are in the unvaccinated population, and that's what vaccination is really meant to prevent. So
I may just add, there is safety data now available on the booster vaccines, and so that's a question some of my patients have asked is, Dr. Castro, am I going to get even sicker with this booster shot? And the data shows that pretty similar to the side effects we saw in the phase 3 studies, sore arm, myalgias, low-grade fever is what we're seeing. We're not seeing a heightened immune response to that third booster shot. So I think that's very reassuring because we know what to expect. That's what I tell patients. That side effect profile is something I say to my patients. I said, we know that it's working for you then. And so those are things that when I balance and talk to our patients about that are hesitant, I say, you know, I've taken care of a lot of very sick patients in the hospital from COVID, and the side effects you're getting from the vaccine are nothing like what we can have seen from a COVID infection. The disability that comes from the COVID infection, this vaccine side effect is transient. It lasts 48, 72 hours, rarely out to, a week. And so, it's something that we believe at this point is acceptable and is acceptable for the booster vaccine as well.
If I could follow up real quickly. So this, after you get the third booster, 8 months after, will you need like another booster 8 months after that, or is it eventually
That's a great question.
maybe going to get to a yearly thing, or what's up with that?
I want COVID to go away so we don't have to take any boosters, but I think that the logic will probably be we do have to have some boosters maybe annually, but we don't really know yet, right? That's just pure speculation, and it'll just take time and research to give us that answer, but I wouldn't be surprised if we needed annual boosters at that point. So.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, we started to give this vaccine just last summer. And so that data about the 8 months is the very earliest data that we have, because we were following those patients out to a year, and we found that we started seeing a little waning in the efficacy around 8 months, and so that's where that 8 months.
And when you say last summer, that's because you were involved in research trials, but they probably didn't get it until the middle of the winter.
We're talking about in the vaccine studies, so we are learning as we go. As we introduce new vaccines, so the vaccine we studied here, the AstraZeneca, we're not even 6 months out from the last patient that was enrolled there. So it is something that we could speculate that we're going to need annual vaccines, but we really don't know until we get farther down the road.
And wait, is this where we say we're building the airplane while we fly at Hawkeye?
Yeah, and I would just caution people not to get too anxious and overexcited about this. Even Vivek Murthy last night on KC Public Television on PBS, in that interview said, we still feel and believe and have great data to suggest that the vaccines continue to protect you overall and reduce your relative risk of going to the hospital, having severe disease and death. We are also concerned a little bit about those mild and moderate cases. And so for this reason, we are starting to promote offering that additional dose of booster vaccine, or that additional dose of vaccine. So I just want people to just calm down a little bit. You still have very good protection. Your overall relative risk of going to the hospital, having severe disease and death, even if you get COVID-19 after that 8 months, is going to be greatly, greatly reduced compared to if you didn't have the vaccine. So just as Dr. Steit said, we are still building this airplane while we're flying it. We are still looking for more data and all of that, but just please continue to be calm. Don't get too anxious. You are still going to be protected from those worst cases of disease.
And just to say, we've had 4 vaccinated deaths out of the over 400 deaths we've had, and so that's less than 1%. And if you look at the ones who have died, they were all end-stage disease or something else. And the other interesting thing, we looked at whether or not in our vaccinated population, we were seeing days out from your vaccination correlate with the number of hospitalizations, or the likelihood we had of increased hospitalization for those who were vaccinated. So it's a long way of saying that we looked to see if the longer you were out from vaccination meant you were more likely to be hospitalized, and we did not find that evidence. Now, it's a small sample size, blah, 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 all those things that say we're not really sure the statistical validity of it. But the observation is that the issue for vaccinated folks is how healthy they are overall, and if they're really severely chronically ill, then it's probably more a question of how well the vaccine response occurred, rather than waning of vaccine response. And I think that that's why we're talking about that third shot, 1 month. That's not a booster shot. That's a third in a series of shots for those who are immunocompromised. That is not the same thing as what the FDA is studying about the question of booster shots. Those are 2 different categories of patients. We have to make sure we look at it like that.
And I just want to remind people this booster shot for the immunocompromised, does not have to wait to 8 months.
Yeah, it's 1 month after your third.
Yeah.
That's right. It's really a third. It's a third shot in the series.
It's a third shot in the series.
It's really not a booster shot, and I think we have to distinguish that language. And we'll be more careful about that, because the immunocompromised, if you're going to give it 1 month after your second shot, it's really now a 3-shot series instead of a 2-shot series.
Exactly.
So Matt from KMBC had that similar question. Is the booster the same thing as the third shot? We keep using both terminologies.
No, and that's why I said we're going to clean up our language about that, because we could be confusing people. It's a third in a series. A booster is 8 months or more after your second shot. That third in a series is because your immune system didn't respond as well as we would have liked it to the first two.
Okay.
And it is important also to stress that keep your vaccine card and use the same one in that series. We don't recommend at this point, if you're going to get that third shot, if you're immunocompromised, you get it from the same manufacturer that you received. So if you got the Pfizer, keep with the Pfizer. If you got the Moderna, keep with the Moderna.
Should that be for pretty much everyone, though?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Can
Just
I
be
ask
clear.
a question?
I think you can.
Okay,
What do
so
you got?
Hawkeye, I sent my vaccine card through the washing machine.
Yeah.
Who do I talk to about getting a new vaccine card? I bet I'm not the only person in America
Yeah.
who's done that. It's just a thought.
I think it would be the best idea to contact who you got your vaccine through. They should have medical records. Certainly we know we have the medical record here. I would imagine all of the pharmacies, the private pharmacies, and even possibly the county health departments have records of that.
So Adam Meyer and Kim Dixon, I need your help. I need a new
Did
vaccine
you really
card.
do that?
I really did do that.
However, in extenuating circumstances, the CDC does allow that you may switch and pivot to another company's mRNA vaccine.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. Do you really have to leave us in like 5 minutes, Dr. Seitz?
You
or we
guys
have...
keep going. I'm going to have to leave in a minute, but you guys,
All right,
you guys keep going.
We
If
just
I
keep
have
going.
to duck out, I'll take
Okay.
my food. I'll walk out.
Well, let's talk with Dr. Mario Castro. He's the Vice Chair of Clinical and Translational Research, so we're really glad you're here with us today. So we do get a lot of questions about monoclonal antibodies and that whole treatment. So for people who don't know what that is, how it works, tell us.
So monoclonal antibodies are an infusion of an antibody that's basically a drug. It's a chemical that's been synthesized that is developing antibodies that are specific to the spike protein that is on the coronavirus. Now, what we've learned early on, so we started some of those studies right here at KU, was that one monoclonal antibody is good, but if you get a mixture of two monoclonal antibodies, it's even greater in terms of efficacy and treatment. So the currently approved under the EUA is a mixture of two monoclonal antibodies that are infused. We are continuing to study this and how to deliver it in better ways. Can we do it as an injection as opposed to infusion, which requires more resources? But currently the approved dose is an infusion.
So originally we were just offering this to outpatients. Is that still the case?
That's correct. The EUA that is for the monoclonal antibody is only approved for outpatient treatment at this point. Now, what is likely going to be evolving is that for a limited number of inpatients that have COVID infection, that have not reached the stage of very severe disease, so being on a ventilator, requiring high flow humidified oxygen, these patients that are in the earlier stages may benefit from the monoclonal antibody at a much higher dose. And so that's currently being used here on a individual basis with compassionate use approval from the FDA. But we are waiting to see if that will be approved by the FDA down the road. It is, I think as Dr. Hawkeye has mentioned, is we are looking for new treatments for our inpatients, and we have limited resources. Most of what we provide is supportive care, which is very important to get them through the illness. But we need new treatments, and there certainly might be something on the horizon.
So what kind of research are we doing? Where are we at with other treatments for COVID?
Yeah, so we have been part of 3 different NIH trials here. They're all called the ACTIVE trials. So ACTIVE 1 and 4 are inpatient trials looking at immune modulators. They basically change how your immune system reacts to this virus, because we know that the virus triggers this very profound response from our immunity. So if we could potentially dampen that response with an immune modulator, that's being studied in ACTIVE 1, and we're enrolling patients in our hospital now for that trial. Active 4 is looking at anticoagulation, blood thinners. What's the best regimen for anticoagulation for patients that are suffering from COVID? And we're studying that currently in Active 4. Active 2, which is our outpatient trial for COVID infections, we are studying basically 6 different treatments now for outpatient treatment of COVID infection. And with this recent surge, we have basically finished our phase 2 studies in the treatments that we're looking at. So the interferon medication, which was a nebulized medication to boost the immune response in terms of interferon response. The Synergen has been completed now in terms of phase 2. We'll move on to phase 3 if we see that the data is efficacious. We have other monoclonal antibodies and polyclonal antibodies that we have studied in the phase 2 response. These are all now have been filled. Fortunately, we have very great volunteers in the community that participate in these trials and know the importance of why they volunteer in trials is to help us get ahead of this pandemic.
Well, that's good news.
Yes.
That we're not searching. Question about people using non-approved drugs to fight COVID. We hear ivermectin a lot. I already have like 3 or 4 questions about that in the feed, and I know it drives you all crazy. But tell us just your thoughts about that and just
Sure.
why that keeps coming up, I guess.
Well, it's certainly a drug that many people are comfortable with because it's been used for other infections and it's available. But we learned early in this pandemic you just can't do that. That we learned, when we were studying colchicine and hydroxychloroquine, and these medications are available, but doesn't necessarily mean they work. And so you have to be very careful. So ivermectin is something that has very small case reports, poor evidence behind it really to be recommended. And currently that's what the CDC's recommendation is, that it not be utilized for that. We are about to enroll in Active 6, which will be a trial that will study ivermectin. And so we'll hopefully have some solid data behind ivermectin down the road, but at this point it's not a currently recommended treatment. Hawkeye?
Yeah, I would completely agree. We know that it is it's an old drug. People have been using it for those right conditions, those parasitic infections. We know that farmers give it to their cows, and we've heard actually stories of farmers out in rural Missouri and western Kansas taking it themselves to help protect them or treat COVID-19. It absolutely does not work. Right now, there have been reports and published reports that have been rescinded by those journals because of inaccuracies or plagiarism or doubling of patient data for one reason or another. The best evidence that we have is that it does not work. I would not give it to my friends or family, either for prophylaxis or for treatment. We should also note that the FDA recommends against it. IDSA, the Infectious Disease Society of America, recommends against it. The World Health Organization recommends against it. And the NIH says there isn't enough evidence to recommend for or against, and it should only be used in those trial areas. And I would certainly agree with using it in trials so that we can get the best data available. But a couple of recent publications, especially in the JAMA network, found no evidence that it helps treatment as an outpatient in protecting against severe disease or protecting against progression to further disease. So.
It's interesting. You try to figure out why is it people have latched on to ivermectin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's dog heartworm pill, right?
Yeah.
It's for your dog. So, but why have people latched on to that? And it's funny. There's this whole sense of the conspiracy, and people don't want to give us that because it's cheap, and you're like, guys, do you understand?
Yeah.
The people. Folks who are advocating for these type of, I saw this one video of a physician who stood in front and said that of a school board and said they're a family medicine doctor, a functional family medicine physician, and by God, he treated 15 patients and none of them gotten sick, and they'd given them hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And I thought, and it's not just that one. You hear that from time to time, like, okay, we've treated thousands of people here, thousands, and across the world, millions of people. And we haven't found a home for ivermectin. And anybody who thinks we wouldn't want to find a home for an easily accessible drug that we could all repurpose and use, we have a whole institute here, IAMI, which is dedicated towards the repurposing of old drugs for new causes because it's so much easier and so much faster if you can do that. And, there are organizations like that across the country where we're all trying to do that. And we can't find real data for ivermectin. Yeah. And so my fear is that people will say, well, I'm going to take ivermectin and have hope. But the drug you need to get if you're sick and you have a lot of risks is a monoclonal antibody. It's not ivermectin. Ivermectin does not offer hope.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, certainly ivermectin is most likely safe, but we know it can cause neurotoxicity or central nervous system toxicity if taken in the wrong doses or you get too much. But also just look at the World Health Organization. Their main goal is to protect those other countries, particularly other than the United States, those lower resource companies, our countries. We know that ivermectin is cheap, it's plentiful, it is a generic drug. You would think that if there was any evidence that it was helping, they would certainly be promoting that and using it for the rest of the world.
Are those your final thoughts today?
My final thought is, I got to run today,
that could be your final thought.
We're going to go get our chief medical officer call going, and I got to go get ready for that.
Okay.
So I apologize if I have to bolt here. But my final thought today is, it's trust the science, and we're doing our very best to take care of you. And instead of trying to find reasons that we're not, you should believe the exhaustion in our eyes, which should tell you this is not fun. And we are trying to tell you how to stay healthy so that you can stay out of the hospital and have room for those people who are sick and are trying to die. And so just trust us that we're not trying to create some conspiracy or paranoia here. We're just trying to tell you the truth.
All right, you may go now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Come back and see us, okay?
Thank you for always being here and always talking.
Okay, we will handle it from here because we got a lot of great community questions. So, okay. So, all right, Dr. Castro, I do have some questions that are coming in about people. And you mentioned it a little bit already, but for folks who are just now joining us, Rebecca wanted to ask: when do you think the newer monoclonal antibodies will be given to people in later stages of those patients who are sicker? You've mentioned it, but can you just kind of go over that one more time for folks joining us?
Yeah, I think the monoclonal antibodies consistently work better the earlier you use them in the disease process, and we know that we're trying to capture patients within the first 10 days of symptoms with the monoclonal antibody. So you can imagine if you're waiting a week and you end up in the hospital and you're in a few days into that hospitalization, you're starting to get sicker, you're going to be beyond that window.
Okay.
And so at this point, there's really limited use of the monoclonal antibodies within the hospital setting, in that inpatient setting. Where we're expanding our knowledge is how to use the monoclonal antibody earlier in the disease process as an outpatient. Mm-hmm. I can imagine, could you go to your area pharmacy and get an injection? That'd be a lot easier than having to come into a hospital setting and get an infusion. So that's where I think the advancements are in the monoclonal antibodies, and there are several that are in that pipeline right now.
My cousin, who is also a KU patient, very immunocompromised, she got COVID. I was so worried, but she came in, got the treatment. She's home doing really, really well. So it's working, and I love hearing stories like that. Cotter says, how is the recruitment progressing for the interferon beta trial, active 2 trial? Am I saying that right? I just don't know if that.
It's one of the drugs that we're studying within active 2 for outpatient treatment of COVID infection. This was interferon was made by a company called Synergen, and it is a drug that we nebulize and we give to you when you have mild infection with COVID. And we are studying that. So that data just completed its phase 2 design, and we're now reviewing that data to understand whether or not it should go to the next phase.
Sherry says, do monoclonal antibodies work on people who are vaccinated but get sick?
Definitely.
Okay.
It is we know that patients that are vaccinated that succumb to the Delta variant can potentially benefit from the monoclonal antibodies. Now, we know less about that population because that's relatively new, and most of our studies were done in patients that were unvaccinated originally. But now we have some data, at least in people that are only partially vaccinated. Maybe they only got the first dose of the vaccine and then succumbed to the COVID infection and have been treated with monoclonal antibodies. At least that preliminary data suggests that the monoclonal antibodies effective in that population that have been vaccinated.
Heather wants to know, would monoclonal antibodies be helpful for those who have long hauler symptoms? Could they be treated as an outpatient? Do you think those would be helpful?
Well, at this point for long haulers, unfortunately, we have no approved treatments. We are starting to study those patients in a study that we hope to roll out here at KU starting next month. Unfortunately, at that stage, you're talking about weeks out from the infection. And so patients are in that recovery phase. Their immune system is recovered from that. And so they're suffering from the long-term disability from that COVID infection, whether it be respiratory disability with compromise of their lung in terms of fibrosis or scarring of the lung, whether it be the mental fog or the cardiac effects from COVID infection. All those, at this point, we have no approved treatment for, and the monoclonal antibodies have not been used for the treatment of long haulers.
Dr. Hawkinson, you're up. People wanting to know when they should get their flu shot. First of all, should they be getting it early like they did last year? Another question coming through about how soon after the booster can they get it, and how soon after that third shot they should get the flu shot.
Yeah, well, right now the CDC guidance is that you may get vaccines at the same visit. Initially, there was a hold, kind of, we didn't want to give any vaccines within 2 weeks of each other of the COVID vaccine and anything else. Right now, the guidance is, and especially this came to light when the pediatrics were when it was authorized for 12 and up, because the children really get a lot of different vaccines when they go to those visits. So right now, you can get multiple vaccines at the same visit. Right now, I looked at the Australia data from a couple weeks ago, and there were, I think, under 500 cases at that point of confirmed influenza. Certainly, we look to the Southern Hemisphere to guide how we anticipate the influenza season. So right now there is very little, but remember last year we had a lot of masking, a lot of restrictions. We don't really have that right now. So there certainly could be an increased influenza season this year compared to last year. I would still recommend getting the vaccine for influenza, maybe in that later October, November period, but it comes with the caveat of just understanding what is the activity in your geographic region. Certainly if we see an early surge or increase in cases in activity of influenza, go get that vaccine as soon as you can. And we know that the CDC guidance is to get vaccinated for influenza when you get the chance so that we don't miss you. So in addition to that, you can still get your additional or booster dosing of the COVID-19 vaccine at the same time if you wish, because you can administer those vaccines together.
Or do you just forgo it since we're back to masking again? Or don't forgo it because now we have Delta?
I would say do not forgo it.
Okay, good to know.
I mean, we learned with RSV, right? I mean, RSV, we did not see very many cases last winter like we typically see. And so I'm afraid the same thing might happen with influenza. We didn't see a lot of influenza last winter. If we continue with the unmasking and not protecting ourselves and not getting the vaccine, then we will see, I suspect, a surge of influenza as well.
Joyce wants to know, how will KU patients be notified that it's time to get their booster? Is it through MyChart, or do they just have to go out on their own and get it at Hy-Vee? How will they be notified it's their turn? I think a lot of people want to know if they're waiting for some sort of call from someone.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we know that you can probably walk into a private pharmacy or another entity and get the vaccine. There's really not a lot of oversight or policing or central data collection for that. Again, I would still caution people that don't be anxious about getting that third or additional dosing if you're not in that immune compromised state or fall under that criteria. How will you be notified? Yes, the health system will be notifying you. We will send messaging out probably publicly, but also through MyChart. So you will be able to do that, and also contact your physicians for any other further questions. We are working on basically the IT build for that in our medical record. So once that is done, which should be fairly imminently, people will be able to know. Again, that's right now for the immune compromised populations. If you are not in those populations and the third dose or additional dosing is offered, and I think the expectation was later September, at that point in time, you will be getting messaging.
Okay, tomorrow's follow-up Friday, so I'm going to start tracking all of these questions you have been asking, and we'll make sure to try to get to those tomorrow. But the last question is from Sandy. Do monoclonal antibodies need to be tweaked to better fight Delta or other variants that may come down the road?
Definitely. We're learning as we go, as we were talked about earlier. And so we are learning that as this virus mutates, that we will have continued need to tweak the monoclonal antibodies. And I think we know from treating other viral infections that using a mixture is ideal in terms of treatment for many viral infections. So our hope is that as we evolve with this pandemic, we will continue to evolve with our monoclonal antibody treatment. And it is amazing that we can actually make these things on the go. The variants vaccines were just being developed, in February, and we're already testing those. So it is amazing science that we can really develop these things in the laboratory and move on to well-performed clinical trials to study them.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Hawkinson.
Yeah, I would think, we're kind of getting into the granular science now, but certainly I think what we have seen is that with that original Eli Lilly product of the monoclonal antibody, it is no longer used because of the change in the variants that were made. So the spike protein, so those antibodies no longer work. Luckily, we've had continued good success with neutralizing activity of that Regeneron product. Why is that? Well, it may not be binding exactly to those mutated areas or those changed areas on the spike, but may help block infection by another way by continuing to just clog things up so the virus is unable to bind. So the other thing to note, if we do continue to change the monoclonal antibodies, and it depends, again, where do they bind on the virus, we will just select out for further variants and further mutations, I guess, in that virus itself, because now we are blocking those ones that aren't unable to replicate. If we don't block the other ones that, say, have changed a little bit and aren't attacked by the monoclonal antibody, those will just select out for those viruses as well. So I think overall we are just very lucky right now that we still have that activity and the neutralizing activity of those monoclonal antibodies from Regeneron.
Okay, I want to get to both of your final thoughts. Dr. Castro, though, you brought a couple of slides. I want to make sure that we have that information out for folks. What can you tell us?
Thank you. Well, as we were talking about earlier, our patients are still coming to us with other entities and questions besides COVID. And so one of the things that we offer here is a study sponsored by the NIH called PRECISE. It's a precision intervention for severe asthma. And severe asthma can be quite disabling for some of my patients, and have tried multiple treatments. And so this network, this study, will be studying that for the first time here at KU, where we will test 5 different new treatments for the treatment of severe asthma. And so I encourage people to, if you have severe asthma, you're not getting the best control from your medications, give us a call. Contact Shelby Almo. Her number is up on the screen there, 913-574-3006. Or you can also go to our website, the preciseasthma.org website, for more information. The second study I want to mention is a new study that we're about to roll out this next month on chronic bronchitis. So these are a new treatment that we are studying for our patients with COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This chronic bronchitis study, we're using a new treatment where we do a treatment in a surgical suite with bronchoscopy, where we go down and we treat the lining of the airways with an ultrasound treatment, radiofrequency treatment to the airways. This treatment in preliminary studies shows that it decreases the mucus production, the bronchitis that is affecting our patients. This GALA study, again, you can contact Shelby Alamo at that number, 574-3006, or you can also look up information about it at bronchitisstudy.com.
Wow, you guys do such great work. We really appreciate everything you do and just your insight today. And I just want to get your final thoughts. Dr. Castro, you could start us out.
Okay, all right. Well, my final thoughts are really just to think about, what can you do to protect yourself and your family? And I would encourage you to really, if you've not been vaccinated, seek your doctor and talk to your doctor about that. We're trying to convey that information, as Dr. Stites has mentioned, Dr. Hawkeye has mentioned, in a way that is the truth. We're not pulling out any stops here. We're telling you the truth in terms of the efficacy from the vaccine. It is the latest data. And people say, well, things have changed. I've heard these stories or whatever. Yes, data does change. We evolve our understanding about this. But you can trust us. We're trying to do the best for you. And I would also encourage you, as we mentioned those two studies, come and volunteer because that's how we are able to get ahead of this pandemic if you're participating in one of these studies. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Castro, we do get a lot of questions about how people can participate. So thank you for that. And you are welcome back anytime. Thank you. Dr. Hawkinson, your final thoughts today.
Yeah, we will soon be offering those additional dosing to our immunocompromised populations. You will be getting messages, and we will have public messages out as well for that. If you are otherwise not in those immunocompromised populations or in those situations, please, again, don't be anxious. If you are fully vaccinated, you are still going to have a great relative risk reduction of having the whole spectrum of COVID-19 disease, especially with hospitalization, severe disease, and death. So hold tight for all of the information and the data. We know that ACIP will be meeting to review all of it, and when that does come along, again, I don't think we are thinking until late September. We'll certainly present that to you, but please don't be anxious or concerned. You are still overall going to have a great relative risk reduction of having to go to the hospital, having severe disease, and dying if you are fully vaccinated. I would still encourage you, if you know people who are not vaccinated, please talk to them and get them vaccinated. That is who we are seeing in the majority of patients that are hospitalized, not only here but in other countries, are those unvaccinated people as well.
Thank you, as always. And thank you all for being with us today. Tomorrow, we are back, as I said, Follow-Up Friday. We're going to get to those great questions that we missed during the week. Also, we told you we are denying transfers on the daily. So some of those stories that we are hearing are, simply put, they are heartbreaking. Dr. Tim Williamson talks about how we handle patient volume and transfer requests. That is tomorrow, starting at 8. But now we leave you with a message from our clinical psychologist, Dr. Greg Nawalnik, on why we must push our personal feelings aside and get back to masking.
We're fighting a predator that has one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is survival. COVID doesn't care. Delta doesn't care about your political beliefs. It doesn't care about your friends and family. It doesn't care about the concert that you're excited to go to. It just knows that it needs one warm body to move to from the other. That's it. The United States, along with a number of other nations in the world, are individualist cultures. What that means is me first. What works for me is what I'm going to do. It's not about the benefit of the whole. And I think that the reality here is that when we have a global pandemic, a situation that threatens so many in our community every day, we have to put the benefit of the whole before the singular. As Americans, we want to believe that we're free, and we don't understand that freedom oftentimes comes with responsibility. You get to be free when you put in the responsibility, when you make the hard decision. This is one of those times where America can really test its mettle and show what we can do. we're making emotional decisions. And when we get mad, our ability to really fine-tune our decision-making process goes out the window. And that really strips us of our humanity, rather than listening to reality and actually making informed decisions, responsible decisions. I would love to see us all be able to come back, grasp our humanity, come together, and really try to find some support in the community, in each other, and know that, listen, it's just a short-term step backwards so that we can take the long strides forward together.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now everywhere podcasts are available.